All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Drive the Conversation, a space for us to continue the conversation surrounding topics of our premiere film, The Drive. As a refresher, The Drive is a virtual reality / YouTube 360 film that reenacts a police pullover from three different perspectives. A Black mother, Deidre, her son, Davion, and a young white male officer, Will. Our goal is to continue these conversations, so let's dive in. We'll start off with introductions of the panel, and then we'll go from there.
But before we go to introductions, we have to ensure that this space is as intentional and our time is as intentionally used as well. We will begin with panel norms, and these norms apply to not just the panel, but for people who are tuning in as well. For our panel and for people who are tuning in, please make sure that first you're leaning in and you're leaning out. If you find that you're contributing a lot, try to challenge yourself and allow others to contribute as well. In contrary, if you find that you haven't been inputting a lot of your thoughts, then challenge yourself to share a little bit more. Number 2 is assume positive intent. Number 3, challenge the idea and not the person. And number 4, what is learned here leaves here. This is just the beginning of a conversation and not the end. And we hope that it inspires connections, it inspires action. So now we will then begin with introductions. Mary, would you like to begin?
I sure would. Hi, my name is Mary McGrath. My pronouns are she, her, hers. They want me to let you know who I am, how I am involved in this project. Well, I am a teaching faculty at the University of Illinois, and I met Jewel a few years ago now as a public speaking instructor, and Jewel blew me away with her talents and the entire class. And after that, we wrote some speeches together, and I'm quite invested in this project, having seen it a year and a half ago begin, and then watching it get filmed and premiered. So I'm pretty excited to be here. Oh, I get to pick the next one to go, so let's go with those.
Hi guys, I'm Miles Valentine. I'm an actor. I play Officer Dave on The Drive, and it's a pleasure to be here. We worked really hard on this film. I'm glad people are finally getting to see it and start the discussions that we're starting today. So, John.
Yes, my name is John Wilson. I am a former police officer. I was brought in kind of recently to kind of give some law enforcement perspective on the film. Now I work in private intelligence. So yeah, just excited to be here and give what perspective I can. Who's left? So I'm only seeing.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Rowe, and I'm the Executive Director for Educational Equity with School District 204, where Jewel graduated. When I met Jewel, she was a high school student, and I got to work with her and learn from her in many different clubs and activities around school. She's also come back many times to support students, and on one of her trips back, she shared, unfortunately, after the killing of Sandra Bland, her idea of wanting to show different perspectives through technology of what that police stop was like. And it's been exciting to see her on her journey develop this project and for it to come to complete fruition. So very excited to be here and to help drive the conversation.
All right, I'll dive in. Y'all are so sweet. Hi, everyone. My name is Jewel. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am the producer, one of the co-producers for The Drive and founders of You Matter Studios. And I'm here because, again, that's why I created the film. I want us to be able to have these conversations in hopes of inspiring you all to engage your communities as well. Pass it to Ira.
And my name is Ira Aquino, and I use she, her, hers. I know Jewel from being in the entrepreneurial ecosystem in the University of Illinois. And if you're a woman of color, you know how important it is to lean into another, again, that saying of that saying of like behind every strong woman is another strong woman. That is the kind of friendship that Jewel and I have, and I always treasure. And with You Matter Studios, I work as a capacity of like a producer for like educational content. And in my day job is like I design projects to uplift underinvested communities in Chicago. So now we're gonna go dive into our first question to our panelists. What is one word that describes how you feel about the current state of police and community relations in the United States? One word or phrase.
Hey, I'll go ahead and jump in. Mine is bifurcated.
I can go.
I'll
second.
go. I'm gonna say broken.
And mine would be entrenched.
And mine would be uncertain.
Mine is volatile.
Thank you. And you can expand a little bit about that onto our next question. How did The Drive capture your experience on this issue, or this issue on the relations between police and community?
So I'll go. For me, playing another officer, it was definitely a different look on perspective that I had. I didn't get to do as much as Adam, the character who plays Officer Will. So like it was very limited what I did, but I think it was more interesting because we basically had an officer on officer interaction, and I think just the way that they treat each other, and you could see that Will was very on edge and unhinged, and like the fact that maybe Dave should have tried to do more to talk to him. Maybe, it was just interesting, that dynamic between me and Adam. So the thing that I take away from it, I think conversations is everything, man. I think like just like this, like, a possible conversation between those two could have changed what happened that night. Not to spoil anything about the film, but you never know. But so like John said, like uncertain is a really good word, but that's kind of my thing, like for the character that I played.
I can go next. So going off the uncertain, it's weird right now, being like a millennial, but like former cop. Also, like you get like kind of like the youth kind of movement, I guess you could say. So like I come from that, but then like also seeing like, I think I did a good job as a police officer. I did it. But like it's also weird. It's like, oh, but like I don't know. I'm proud of what I did as a police officer, but it's also like weird because I know like there's all these issues happening. So it's kind of like weird. Like, how do I kind of fit into this? And like you said, Miles, conversations can go a long way. And if anybody was around for the Q&A after the film debuted last night, they talk about the tones, like the perspective tones from the different point of views. And like can 100% say like that is completely accurate. There's times where it's like, but like I felt like you're coming at me. Like maybe I did come in with like a little aggression, but at the time you don't even think about it. You know what I mean? So the film I think did like a really good job of showing, like giving an honest view of police work like in these days, while not like going like overboard, like pro police, like not saying that. I think the film did a really good job with that.
Yeah, I think the pieces, and I put the word I selected was bifurcated because, in my work in education, we have resource officers, and I could see firsthand just the amazing work that they would do with our kids, the obstacles that they would come in, but as well as the challenges and how they can kind of move over that line and be more taking a lens of having to be so defensive, and how that kind of goes against the work that they want to achieve. When I worked with Jewel, I was actually a dean, and my thing was it's so important to have positive relationships with young people and be preventative and restorative, because then the outcomes would turn out in a more of a positive, inclusive way versus having to be defensive and punitive. And I think we're all struggling with getting to that place. I also thought it was so important with those human conditions that we all are struggling. And you could see how that officer had a lot of baggage, and he didn't have that partner or someone to help check him in that moment. And that impacted his ability to assess more clearly. And I like what you guys have been talking about, the need for those dialogues, right? That we have to constantly be assessing and having conversations. And he wasn't there in that film. He was shut down of not going to counseling and leaning in with other people. And that was impacting his judgment. And so I think having that system really made me reflect on it when I was watching the film yesterday. Even in our hard times, we have to do that work.
And for me, it was on a personal level, less so a structural level for this question, just thinking about traffic stops in which I've been stopped and the safety I felt in challenging the officer because I might have been frustrated with the reason why I was pulled over. I have had officers laugh in response to my frustration and anger instead of respond with aggression. And so it made me really reflect on the privilege I have as a white woman when I get pulled over and how it's a completely different experience for me, perhaps.
Yeah. And it's interesting, like even trying to like answer this because I helped write it. So like there's intention behind every like single experience, but again, trying to capture the Black experience, trying to capture the officer's experience. And also like it is interesting trying to figure out, okay, how is the Black experience and officer experience tied together? That's why we had Miles play Officer Dave. So that's something I wish we kind of dived in a little bit more. But yeah, like, I'm glad that it was like, at least you were all able to gather those pieces because it was intentional. So, yeah.
I have a follow-up question for this one. Y'all like really tapped into like the different identities that you were bringing into as you watched and reacted to the film. Like y'all talked about your occupations as an officer, as an actor, as educators. Like as you were watching the film, like what identities do you feel the most affected? And like, can you tell and how? Like tell a little bit like how.
I can jump in on that one. So I'm a mom. So yesterday I was telling Jewel, I didn't get to jump in yesterday because I was visiting my son. I just dropped him off he's a freshman in college. And so during the start of the pandemic, when we started having some, protests and demonstrations, there was an evening in our area where things were getting out of hand. And I have many friends, and some of like that intersectionality you're speaking about, officer who's a Black woman who I'm close with. So I was texting with her because I knew there was looting and, cars were set on fire, and she was really scared, right? And she's an officer and super brave. And then I was thinking of my son who was at work, and he was getting off of his shift and coming. And so it was kind of close to that. And he had to drive home. And so for him being, a brown boy in a community, and I live in a predominantly white community, and where he was at was on the border. I was like, what is his drive home going to be like? And so, my husband and I were like concerned about going to his job and following him home. And we finally landed on him having his phone on the seat so we could talk with him all the way home. And that's just a regular fear of, when he started to drive, who would be in the car with him, practicing what he would do. And, even many times for me, I've seen his wallet where he's left his driver's license, and I've driven to another state to take him his wallet because I would be so afraid that he wouldn't have his identification. And that was the first thing in my mind. Like, I'm driving to Indiana right now. So yeah, I was really wearing that mom hat, and in particular being a Black mom, and those things that go through your mind, and not just rites of passage, but also our passage of growing up to be a man. And that is violence to your body can occur.
Yeah, it could happen. So I guess there wasn't a specific identity or person that really struck a chord with me. More or less like the traffic stop itself. Like I've been on stops where I pulled over an African American male, and like I've had a whole range of emotions. I've had like the first one I ever stopped, like legitimately was like petrified, and like I kind of mentioned earlier, being like a millennial cop, like I knew like racism did exist. I knew like that there was like this bad relationship between police, but I was like, hey, like why are you like so scared? Like it caught me off guard and kind of like really introduced me to like, oh wait, this is like a real thing. Like I'm white. I never experienced that. You know what I mean? So like I got to experience it from a different side, that this is like a real issue. So I guess it just triggered a lot of memories from when I was on the force.
Yeah, I'll go. The identity that kind of connected me the most, because I played in the film, so it's kind of, when I watched it as a viewer, uh, emotionally, I think the mom's perspective uh, hit me, but my own personal experiences being pulled over by the police, sometimes for no reason at all. Um, I did, I can relate with Davion's situation because I've been in those situations. And I've met some great cops who were super cool. They've, hey, tail lights out, or sometimes I'm like, hey, why, I've met some not so great ones, but I feel like I could feel for every one of the identities, because I think at the end of the day, everybody had, you could feel that empathy for these characters. You know what I mean? Like Officer Will was going through a lot of stuff, and like he didn't take those precautions that he should have, like talking to people, his FOP counselor, his friend who's trying to reach out to him, but he's pushing people away and letting all this stuff build. And you can kind of see like, well, I kind of get it. It's still terrible and wrong. And Davion, that's sadly what's going on too much, and the mom and his family, yeah, it's just tragic, So I feel for every one of the characters.
I think it's also like what you were saying with Davion there, because I almost want to be like, sometimes our young people have a difficult time following the kind of rules of the community. And we're in this phase where, people question things a lot more and want to challenge some of those things more. And there's that
Right.
gap between kind of like elder people and younger people. And they're thinking that they can just have this dialogue. I remember a professor saying to me, get off your soapbox, like you don't have enough knowledge to be there. And we're not equal. And I think there's, again, that gap with young people. And so they're thinking they can go ahead and touch everything, question everything, and not recognizing they're getting into that danger zone. And I love that dialogue with the parents where the mom and dad were going like, well, does he understand that, where they are in this world? And, as a woman of color with my kids, I'm like, when are you teaching them enough about that? Because they have to be fearful enough of recognizing their package, just like it's different going to college as a young woman, right, than it is for a boy. Those dangers are very different. And if you don't recognize those nuances, you're going to put yourself in an unsafe place. So it was really hard watching all of that and
Right.
saying there's some things that the young man in his package, he has to recognize, because he was doing all those things. And he was escalating that officer for all the things he was trained for, the officer. And I don't know if we communicate in general with young people about those dangers enough.
Yeah, I think what I can speak on is because I've seen it so many times. The one part that always gets me is just the helplessness of Davion. Like he's not driving. And we were intentional about having his friend driving. And it's just like that instilled fear is just something that it's something that's ingrained in us. And I think like John, you captured it right when it's like, wow, like the first time I engaged, this person was like scared of me, but like this is what we grow up feeling. And it's just even watching, like it gets me all like, ah. So like I think that's something that I react to, obviously, as a Black woman. I've been in similar situations. There's actually this time that it was me and a couple friends and we got pulled over at night and we were like listening to some rap music and we're like, no, let's like switch to like Carrie Underwood or something, just to be chill. And it's just like subtle things like that to be safe. But you know, there's that, but then also like the conversation. And when the father's like that extra layer of armor, like, you know, I know my mom is like always telling my brother, hey, you cannot drive past this time. Or like if we're trying to go to our neighbor's house and it's at night, it's like, how about I do it, which may not be the best because like I'm still in danger too, but it's like these things are ingrained. So it's just like, when can we get to a point where there's not a fear to just be on the road, to just engage? And I hope it starts with the conversations. I know there's not only bad officers, obviously, but I think like there's something that needs to shift. And I don't know what it is, but I want us to be able to get there as a country. So yeah.
Mary, did you want to weigh in?
I was thinking a lot about the driver and the driver feeling passive in their role, the way it was written, the way they delivered their lines, and they weren't in the driver's seat, so to speak. And just not being assertive, I guess, and not taking on some of that heat that the police officer was giving in response to the passenger. Really don't have any pronouncements to make about it. It's making me think a lot more about if I'm driving with people in my car who could be targeted with racial profiling or other stereotypes. Will I feel that confidence to engage and absorb some of that attention and aggression? Will I be ready to take on that role in the driver's seat? It's making me think a lot about that.
And I think that's like the importance of allyship. Like we were intentional by having his friend be Indian because this conversation tends to be very Black and white when it's like, we all have a place in this conversation. So yeah, I'm glad you called that.
I was gonna say like, thank you for bringing that up because like I was gonna weigh in and say like, as an Asian woman, like the one thing that struck out was like, honestly, I'm gonna call my community out. The Asian community, we have to do a better job because like we have certain privileges. Like granted, we're it's not as elevated as like for the white community, but in Asian Pacific Islander, they say Americans, like we tend to be oblivious sometimes of the things that the Black community like goes through that as seen by the actions of the friend. Like I don't want to like do spoilers, like yeah, there needs to be so much more work in terms of solidarity that's like explicit to like that my community needs to be like doing. All right. Moving on. So we talked about like how did the drive capture your experience like regarding this issue. Can you like, are there some things that it did not? Like where did the drive lack in terms of addressing just how you feel about police and community relations?
I don't want to answer first.
I can take it. You know, it's a short film, so it's kind of limited into like exactly how far it could go down the conversation just on time. I love that this could be an educational platform, and I would love to see like other scenarios. Like I have ones like already in mind where it's like, say like you're at a big party and like the cops are coming to the party, like how to like don't just like start running out. I mean, like everybody's trying to get away from the cops. I get it. But like also like the cops might in a split second make a decision that, so there's just so many opportunities I think that like popped up into my mind when I was watching the film that was like, oh, they could do so much with this, like going off this concept.
Yeah, I like that the open ending piece as well, because I think it allows for you to have that dialogue and to come up with those responses of what could happen, as and literally as like community activities of how to problem solve from there. So I absolutely agree. There's so many other things you can do, but it allows for you to then process and take it in many different directions with the dialogue. So I hope we could do that with some of our young people.
Yeah, I definitely want to, it would be great to do more scenarios, but also different people as well. Like, thinking back during the creation, my first instinct was, okay, let me actually create it from like a Black male's perspective. But that was after doing it from Sandra Bland's experience, a Black woman. And I think it's important to expand the conversation, because when we think about the movement like Black Lives Matter, right? We always see it's like a Black cisgender male, and we don't cover everyone else. So like, that's something that I wish could be covered in the future. So I think we did a decent job so far, but I see a lot of opportunities to cover more perspectives. Yeah.
All right. Moving on. This question is for John and Miles. Can you compare and contrast being a police officer versus playing the role of one?
So my experience playing the role, like I said earlier, it was pretty limited. Adam got to do most of the meaty, like, ride around, actually do the traffic stop, and like actually be in those shoes. I kind of was just his buddy trying to reach out to him in a dark time. So I can't really say like I had any experience. I would love to hear John's experiences as an officer, because I think that would maybe make me think of, oh, well, maybe I did think of I should posture myself this way, or come on, you know what I mean? Like, so I would love to hear your experiences.
Yeah, so I'll stick to like what basically your role in the movie was, because
Right.
we're not going to get into like a whole like, oh, this was my career in law enforcement.
Right.
And kind of going off the theme of like, let's have conversations here, that kind of conversation does not happen enough. We're even like, typically like if you're on a pretty hard call,
Right.
like somebody might afterwards like pull up to you as you're typing up your report in the crime, like, hey, you good? And like, you're like, yeah. You're like, all right, see ya. Like, but that's like pretty much the extent of it, or maybe if you have like a close buddy on the force, maybe, over beers afterwards,
Right.
after the call, you'll kind of talk about it, but like, there's definitely not like the needed, like, I don't want to say like required mandatory like therapy, but like more conversations need to be happening internally for cops to be dealing with like the stressors of the job.
Yeah.
I'd love to.
Oh,
I'm sorry. I wanted to jump in. I've just, because of everything that's been happening, one of the communities that we live in here in Illinois is Aurora, and I get to work pretty closely with the Aurora Police Department. And because of everything that's been going on, there were calls to all the mayors of cities across the United States to do a lot of police reform, and within a certain amount of time. And so the city of Aurora created a plan where they were doing it within 60 days. And they did outreach with community forums, and they really shared a ton about what their education process. So there's really such a difference between one police department and another. And I think that's super important to recognize what they're required to do by state, and then what police departments do within their community. And so wherever you live, I think that's really important, again, so we're not blanketing that. And I was extremely impressed to see how their focus is on that mental health, and how they actually have for them on call social workers that do ride on alongs with them, which some police departments don't do. So again, I think it's really interesting to get involved and know what's going on with that police department and how actively they are engaged in some of this work. And I would say in our area where we live here in Aurora in particular, that their police department is very actively engaged in their social emotional health of their officers and how they're able to outreach with the community. So that's a huge focus for them.
I definitely agree. Just like adding to like what Jen has said, like I feel like it also boils down to like it's like I work in education, right? So like my only really in-depth experience of working with police officers is like with the SROs in school. I can also argue that like not all educational environment is created the same. And like say for example, I work in a school in CBS where there's over 30 languages represented in our campus, and like you can actually see like the work that that the SROs are putting in terms of being culturally respectful, culturally competent, and like there I think there is a need for dialogues like as to like how can you like how those dynamics work, because like there really is no one solution fixes all kind of deal. Okay, moving on. What kinds of ideas would you like to see discussed alongside of the film? And I would like to start with John. Like, what kinds of ideas would you like to see, like in the perspective of like in the police departments? Like, how do you see this? Like, how do you see this film kind of like inspiring? What kind of dialogue do you see this like film inspiring, like within like the police like world?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many conversations that need to happen. Yeah, it sounds cliche, but it's like these community events, like, out in Illinois, they do like a lot of like, what is it, cop on a roof at like Dunkin' Donuts. You're supposed to like go meet up with like local law enforcement, but like, I don't know like how much success those types of events actually have. I don't know exactly like whether it has to be at like a town hall kind of thing, or maybe more ride-alongs, but then you can get into like a whole legal debate over like if somebody gets hurt on a ride-along. But I still think it would be beneficial to see if that's something we can try to get happening in the future, some type of like actual communication, not like these like once a month 2-hour events.
Can I do a follow-up? I'm so sorry. John, like you like heavily like touched on like the like company, almost like company culture, like in the police like world, policing industry. Sorry, I'm like looking for like the right umbrella term. But basically like again the same question, like what kinds of ideas would you like to see discussed regarding like the culture, like in the working environment, like in the police?
Yeah, so that, I guess, a conversation that should happen, and we need many more officers beyond me, is like the concept of the thin blue line. Like coming from it, like, and that's like the whole police culture is blue line. And like, I think there's a little bit of misconception amongst the public as to, like, what blue line, like, and that's like the Blue Lives Matter. I know that's become like very controversial, but like, I don't know. We need to have a conversation. Is like, what exactly are we gonna like define like blue lives or the blue line as? Like, obviously we have to have some real conversations about like, I'm not saying even like full on corruption or systemic anything, but it's like, are we allowing issues to get swept under the rug because of this culture, this blue line thing? Even if it's like, it might be something that is relatively minor. Like, does that lead to us allowing bigger things that we don't even realize that we're doing it necessarily? So I guess that would be like a big discussion point I'd like to see happen.
Can you briefly describe what the blue line is?
So like, I'm not saying this is justified or not, but when we leave the department to start our shift, like, we're usually just dealing with people on like their worst days. So we're dealing with like a lot of like, we're not seeing necessarily the best parts of society a lot of the time. So it's like, hey, I don't care if you're white, Asian, black, like other officers, like we're all blue right now, you know? So like, that's like the Blue Lives Matter thing is like, hey, our skin color when we're on duty is blue, you know? And I'm not saying I agree or disagree or anything like that. I'm just saying like, that's kind of like the concept of it. So it kind of, it gets tough where it's like, you're experiencing just like a lot of bad with your blue, you know, brothers and sisters, where then it does become an issue where you're like, it kind of becomes an us versus them situation. And I don't know how to like necessarily fix that. It's like the demilitarizing our police during like the riots and like major protests. It's kind of tough to be like, do I want to take my helmet off before they stop throwing things? You know, like, yeah, conceptually, I would love to take it off, start to have that conversation, but it's kind of tough to actually get somebody to do it when there's still a perceived or real danger there to them.
Thank you. And just like zooming out again for everybody, the question is like, what kinds of ideas would you like to see discussed alongside this film?
It's just hard because I don't, there's a lot of ideas, but there's just a fundamental distrust. And I think it just goes back to like the history of like relations with just like policing and then race. And that's why I'm like, what other topics can we dig into outside of the systems that have the power to change this? So that's like where I'm struggling to answer, because yeah. That's why I said volatile in the beginning, because it's just so broken. And I think there needs to be, whether it's like reform, more discussions, all of it, so we can get to a place where we can actually be supporting each other as a community. So I don't know if that's an answer. That's just like what I'm thinking right now.
Yeah. Same. I don't know if this is an answer to the question, but I was speaking to somebody who is a police officer. And one thing that confuses them is mixed messages from the community, where a portion of the community is very deep on the police oriented, but then some of the neighborhoods in which they're often called to for domestic violence calls, gunshots, these sort of things, people who live in the area will thank the police officer for coming in and resolving the issue. And so I think just the gratitude shown when they arrive in, like what was said earlier, the darkest hours of their lives. I want the community to discuss how everybody can show up in the darkest hours of our neighbors' lives, instead of portioning that off into neighborhoods that we like to forget about, that we then send police officers to in place. So that's what it made me think of.
Yeah, and I think that goes because, you know, being an educator, and right now everyone's kind of going like, well, what can the school do? I'm like, well, I don't know if we can solve the childcare problem in society. I don't know if we can solve the mental health problem in society, but we have been the stopgap, and everyone's realizing those are the problems that we also solve, that really school is secondary. I think that goes a lot to say with our police officers, that we have all these systemic problems in our community, and they are called to answer all of those. They're the stopgap for those, and they're not really prepared to do that. And when you respond to that over and over again, you do see a lot of ugly. So then you kind of are at a heightened level. Same thing in the schools, like you're kind of blamed for everything, but then called upon to do everything. So it's that love, hate we need. And we're not looking at, as a community, what we value, and then putting our resources into having that system. Like, we probably need universal health care. We need to be able to have mental health. We really need to have, you know, paid leave for parents and things like that, because we're a first world nation, but we don't have a first world system. And I think, Jewel, that goes back to our problem with race and racism, because those countries who are first world countries, you can look at the demographics of those communities, and they're not as vast, they're not as brown as we are. So again, we can kind of move away from those things and look at our systems, but it's going to always kind of bring us back to that issue we have with racism. And until we begin to deal with that, all these other things, it's going to be difficult to truly begin to solve them. That's my opinion.
Miles, did you want to chime in?
I agree with Jewel. I think the film really hit all the beats that we intentionally wanted it to. So I don't really know what other discussions besides this one, so I kind of just agree with Jewel on that. I think like we did a very good job of like what the discussion we wanted to have for this film specifically would be. But I think there's room for other projects in this platform, that you can have different discussions. But I think for this specific film, I think we had kind of hit the nail on the head with what we wanted to bring home. So
I guess really quickly, my hope that this film like enlightens like enough that like it blows skepticism away, because like I think for me like one of the hardest things to combat is like when you talk about, oh, these things happen to like people, but especially Black people, like it baffles me when people are like, well, like that's actually just like a very select few case. Like it's, I hope that this film like activates empathy enough to like for the viewer to like be inspired enough to like take action. Um, so earlier we had like a question specifically for John and Miles. Now I want to ask a question for our educators, Jen and Mary. What are some like best practices inside and outside of the classroom that you would recommend for people to have meaningful and productive dialogue around this topic?
Yeah, I need to take notes.
That's a big question, so this isn't thought out, but one of the things I grew passionate about after leading discussions around political issues, social issues, and the courses I've taught over the years is the lacking priority in educational systems to teach listening intentionally and deliberately. We love to teach a speech, how to give a speech, how to hold a platform and to be perceived as confident, to be perceived as trustworthy, all of this. But so much of that, as we've seen, has gone out the window of having standards and all of that for when people have a platform and speak from it. And so I think if we taught people a critical lens when they're receiving information and not be so wrapped up in perceptions they're not even really aware of, I just really like this speaker. I like how they make me feel. I like what they're saying. I relate to them. I don't know. There just needs to be, from kindergarten on through sixth grade, through high school to college, more instruction on how to take in information, think about the source of that information, not be so reactive to where that information is coming from. So that's just where I would start, is implementing broad listening instruction very early on.
Yeah, I think that was a great advice. And for me, I've been this summer, because of everything that's been going on in my district, I work with a great team, and we put together a Black Lives Matter Summer Summit for our teachers. And even though it says Black Lives Matter, it's really looking at social justice, right? But being able to anchor it in Black Lives Matter was pretty powerful. And so one of the big things we've been talking about is making things really relevant to kids, right? Where are we now? And connecting it to what has happened in our history, right? So if we're looking at Black Lives Matter, we're all looking at the civil rights movement, but we can't stop looking at what happened with the disabilities rights, right? And LGBTQ plus and women's suffrage, so how are we anchoring what's happening today, making it relevant, and then connecting it to those things in the past? The other part is that whole sense of social justice and seeing who we all are and being okay with that, and making sure that all young people can connect their identity and experiences and struggles to that of their peers, because it's not okay to sit down when they're little and talk about, being kind. Well, okay, so being kind, but then specific. So being able to talk about race and other issues and connect those, because being nice isn't enough. You have to see those things. And then really giving vocabulary for that, because a lot of our young people, in particular Black and brown kids, are kind of stuck at a certain level and they don't have the language to articulate some of these things. So, we don't want to be stuck with the mad or angry, but they're frustrated and they see injustices, and they need that vocabulary and knowledge of history to be able to express and communicate that, and give them those platforms to be able to do so. And it doesn't always have to be centered in just writing, right? Because that is valued by certain cultures and communities, and we put a huge value on that versus other modes of communication. And I think that's where we have to do that switch. And then the last thing I would say, just as educators, my big focus has been on recognizing that we have to decenter whiteness. And that's, majority of our educators are there. So we kind of have to see where we are as educators and how our background, right, impacts that lens by which we're teaching our students. So I'm really looking a lot at who's teaching, what we're teaching, and how we're teaching.
And that reminds me of a current movement right now where there's calls to do away with our history instruction until whiteness is decentered and we really evaluate the accuracy of whose voices are represented in historical facts. United States history is presented. And so some people perceive in this movement that until we can do it right, we don't do it at all. So it's a huge debate right now, but I find that one solution to this question has been.
And I think that brings us back to, this film and the need, kids are wanting to know that history and where policing, where that came out of, like slave catching, right? And then, the 13th Amendment and the development, of those freedoms, and how our prison system, has it been exacerbated today. So I think challenging those things and helping us know our history will then allow us to answer these questions that we're experiencing through this film.
I just want to say I agree, I love that y'all both touched on this idea of teaching with intentionality, and incorporating real truths from the communities that educators are trying to serve. Again, in the CPS school that I had a privilege serving in last year, it's predominantly Black school, and particularly we get a lot of African immigrants in our community, and I can attest firsthand how powerful it is when we built out this really extensive Africa movement, which is African history, is something that I personally only interacted with when I went to University of Illinois. And you can see kids when they learn about Mansa Musa, they're so much more energized, seeing, learning about cultures that they actually have roots in, versus learning about the default ivory tower classics. So yeah, I guess follow-up question for our educators. If you're a person and you watch the drive and you feel so empowered, but you're not necessarily the kind of person who's action-oriented or outspoken, but want to approach your network and your friends and family, but don't know how to do so, what are some scaffolded ways, step 1, step 2, step 3, that you would recommend if you're not used to leading or fighting for this kind of conversations to happen?
Mary and I are looking at each other. So I think one thing is just depending on what mode that you are used to communicating in, but we've been sharing, we love some podcasts right now. So, and you can kind of start more mild, so if you think of Brene Brown, for example, she has a great podcast and I think she's approachable by a lot of people. So you can kind of, and you don't have to start with the harshest episode dialogue that she has, but start that learning community with those people or share some resources like that, and then you can kind of build up to it. So that's one thing that I recommend, and even just with your folks in your family, begin to talk about those issues at home. I think right now for families with your children, I find that you need to talk about the news that's going on, because in particular, white children need to know and see those things and have that vocabulary. I think oftentimes families have really been able to isolate them. That's where we get that white privilege, right? Of they don't have to know about that, but those kids are challenging that. So really begin to have those dialogues, and look at the news and arm them so that then they can be those social justice warriors out there and be allies, and will learn and then practice some of those things, so that when they are in those difficult situations, even if you're not the best at it, doesn't mean you can't be an excellent teacher to help your child. So I know in my own home, have since my boys were little, of knowing who they were and also how they could be allies, and giving them the vocabulary and motions to talk about, don't touch me, and literally being like this in our words, or stop that. So practicing those things with the younger people that you have an influence on can be a great place to start as well.
Yeah, thinking of this as happening in steps is really interesting. It's almost like step one is this is now a shareable link. It's a video, and when it becomes available to wear through VR tech, right? That's something that you can initiate an activity and conversation with. And before the video is watched with whoever it is you want to have an open dialogue with and maybe influence, lay some ground rules. I think we do it in classrooms. We did it with this panel on expectations of behavior. And we forget that we can set boundaries and have expectations for dialogue and behavior with our loved ones, with our family members and friends, and say, I would really love to have a conversation about this. Here's like how I'd like to have the conversation go. Do you have some time to watch this with me and follow up with me? People do it with movies all the time. They hold discussions after the movie's over. Why not with a tool like this? So I saw it as actually something quite natural and fitting right in with some social norms and practices for a lot of people. So, I like it.
So we're coming to the end of our time. We have 8 minutes left. Oh, 7 minutes left. So our final question it's for everybody is, in what way do you visualize or want, or do you hope for this film to inspire action? In what way do you hope for this film to inspire action?
I'll hop in. I guess the biggest way I could see as inspiring action is if it could somehow get into schools, ideally with like the headset. You know what I mean? Like schools like across the board, like white communities, black communities, mixed communities, like all everywhere. So like everybody is getting that perspective, the multiple perspectives on this type of thing. And I think the younger you can get it, into schools, probably the better. Because sometimes, if you do it too late, people are already starting to get ingrained in their beliefs that might prevent them from fully taking in the film.
Yeah, to piggyback off John, I think getting this into schools would be amazing. And I think just the VR is such a cool platform because like you it literally just drops you into the driver's seat, to all these three characters, and you get that perspective other than just being like a third party just watching it. So you can literally just watch the film and be like, hey, how'd that make you feel? And it instantly just sparks that conversation. You know what I mean? Like, because you feel like you're there, you're in it. You know what I mean? And it makes people go, whoa, wow, okay. So, you know what I mean? So I think, getting that into schools would be incredible. And I think, like John said, the younger, the better. And I just hope it just continues to spark dialogues and conversations.
I was going to say that the VR technology gets into a vicarious experience, and what more is action than having dialogue and talking about our experiences? So for people to be able to have this vicarious experience, they're going to be more inclined to talk about it, to tell narratives about it, and feel some sort of connection and relation to it instead of talking about it as something outside of themselves. And so, yeah, getting it into schools, I just, see classrooms of students being more inspired to share an open dialogue in classroom settings. But even in my college setting, I'm already envisioning that I have a budget for programs, and so I can purchase VR technology. I can hold programs that are led by multicultural advocates because we already have structures in place. So it's nice that I think that this fits nicely into structures that are already in place, trying to make an effort to open dialogues, inspire action, and it just fits right into that. So I'm excited to take it further in my own communities.
Miss Jewel, there's so much I think that you can do with this, and I would love to see the kids actually being able to experience that. And I think it is so important, and not just for our young people, but I think for some of our older people as well. Again, just working so closely with our police department and their desire to learn and to experience things. And we always need those reminders so often. And I think this is just one of those tools, like something you can have that can just allow you to stop and remind you of like what your purpose is, why you're there, why you have to think that way, because we can become distant from that and out of shape in those areas. And this kind of just helps to snap you back and encourages you to think about things from different perspectives. Which we need to do, because I know I get stuck in my way. I'm the mama, and I want it mama's way, and I have to also look at it, since I was just visiting my new college student, his perspective as a young man going away to college, see things from his point of view. So I think this is a great tool, and I'm excited to see what's going to go as you unleash it to the community.
Yeah, like I really hope this film creates the space to have more of these conversations and really create empathy. Love the idea of immersing it into classrooms, but especially like for students that don't have to experience this too, because it's a great tool for allyship. And like we definitely created this at a different time, and I still would love for us to continue to have conversations, but yes, a definitely emphasis on allyship as well. It also would be just great to continue, like I said, to have these conversations with officers, with educators, with all of us. So, and then have it inspire and like have it translate into action. So yeah, that's what I hope. I know there's a lot of answers, but y'all giving us a lot of thoughts. So yeah, please share. If you're listening to this, please share and start the conversation, drive the conversation.
All right. Thank you so much to all our panelists. Thank you, Jewel. For our audience that's watching this, like this is the inaugural, the Drive the Conversation, and we are hoping that this first conversation models the vision of what the drive was made for, which is to drive or to create dialogue that's meaningful and it inspires action. Jewel, do you want to talk more about where they can find the link to the film?
Yeah. Oh, sorry, I cut you off. What did you say?
So just close us out.
Yes. Okay. So yes, again, thank you to all the amazing panelists. It took you a lot of bravery to be honest here. So thank you so much, but also just for continuing to spread the message. So thank you, first of all. Second of all, if you want to find the film is on our YouTube channel. It's titled The Drive. For best experience, you should put it in like a Google Cardboard or a headset. But the secondly is if you don't have one, it's okay. I would say try to use earphones or headphones so you could be really immersed in the audio. That's a lot of what we were referring to with tone. But then also you can turn on captions so we continue to make it accessible. But yes, it is available on our page. So really our ask is, when you share the film, use the hashtag Drive the Conversation and share your perspectives, but also more importantly, engage your communities. Like this started with us trying to somehow mend relations between police and communities. And I think it's just been able to broaden, not only because of what's happening now, but just because of having these conversations and just learning more about other people's perspectives. So anyways, you can stay tuned with all our content by subscribing to our YouTube channel, You Matter Studios. And also please share the film, The Drive, using the hashtag Drive the Conversation. All right. Well, thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
All right.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye. Now that you've been able to see the film, we want to hear from you. Share your perspective using the hashtag #DriveTheConversation and engage your communities so we can continue to create the space for understanding, empathy, and fundamentally healing, and let it evolve into action, allyship, and inspire policy change. Again, share your perspective using the hashtag #DriveTheConversation, and stay tuned for our content where we will also be engaging our communities and officers so we can continue to address relations between police and communities and fundamentally talk about race in America. Stay tuned.